Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to Worth It Then, Worth It Now, a sort of pilot program I've been running on this channel where I revisit games that I covered on my main channel, a year plus ago under the segment Worth Your Time, Worth Your Money. And in this case, we're going back to Last Faith. So this gives me an opportunity to revisit and shout out games that I remember fondly and perhaps you missed at the time. I try and line it up with a sale, which is the case here. It's actually on fairly deep discount at the moment, about half price. And yeah, I've dipped back in this morning and recorded some B-roll and played a little bit more. My goodness, this game is so good. I really like it, and I highly recommend it for a whole gamut of different fandoms. Like if you like Metroidvanias, if you like Souls-likes, if you like Resident Evil. This gives me a lot of mouthfeel from that. And look, we'll talk about that. But essentially, it is a bit of a melding of Metroidvania and Souls-like type games. It has this Gothic setting, so I suppose you could say probably more Bloodborne-ish. And it's told in that storytelling, carrot on a stick, drip feeding little bits of information with unusual characters. Has some really nice cutscenes with this cool sort of pixel art going on, and just generally the whole world is wonderful. It's still fresh in my mind, obviously, because I've just come off recording some stuff, but like it has a save room theme when you come onto a screen that has like it's essentially a save room. You can teleport, fast travel anywhere, but you're safe. And it's so in line with Resident Evil. So the reason I mentioned it, actually, let's just unravel it a bit more about me. Resident Evil is probably my favorite series of all time. It just is. I love everything about it. And I've talked many times about the fact that it just happens to be a horror game. Don't get me wrong, I like something like Silent Hill, but if you wanted to look at let's say like a meta layering, Silent Hill's trying to scare you, the player, in a way, right? And trying to make you uncomfortable and creeped out, and it's more about trying to scare you. Whereas I find things like Resident Evil, it just is set in a horror setting. It's probably scary for the characters, but I've never really found, the zombies and mutations and all that to be terribly scary. Creepy, curious, unsettling a little, but more of a setting than an objective to scare the player. And this feels that way as well. It has that horror setting. There's a church sort of going a little bit crazy. There's some sort of mutation experiments, and you might not see it at first blush, but the comfortable feeling I get playing a Resident Evil type game, which are kind of Metroidvanias in and of themselves, a lot of back and forth, get the key to open this room, that sort of thing. That's all going on here. So that might be the third removed comparison of genres, but to me, it really does evoke that feeling and immediately becomes probably probably one of my favorite of these Metroidvania type games, which funnily enough, I haven't covered a lot, at least through my growing up. Like, I didn't grow up with Metroidvanias, and I've played a few in recent years. Like Ori and the Blind Forest is probably one of the best ones ever. But here's the interesting thing. Comes to memory, and I'd probably have to go back and check it out, but Salt and Sanctuary was the first one that really went for this 2D side-on platformer type Souls-like genre jump. And since then, there have been a few attempts at getting Souls-like and Metroidvania together, and generally speaking, they don't actually spin the plates together that well, which is to say, it'll be a side-scrolling Souls-like, but the Metroidvania components will be weak and fall by the wayside. You'll end up with kind of a soft platformer, that sort of thing. Not so here. To me, this is a perfect 50-50 melding of the two genres. So all the usability and readability that you'd expect from a Metroidvania with the world maps and the coloring, and you can put your own little symbols in there if you really want to, and the puzzling already, like, again, I'm not playing dumb, but I went back into a new save. I chose a different class, like a sort of spellcaster one, so I had different weapons and kind of a lightning spell, which is probably different from when I first played it and reviewed it back in the day. I would have gone more brawler, melee heavy. But already, there's hook lines that I don't have access to, there's push blocks, that sort of thing, locked doors that need keys. So it's already laying that groundwork in the first, opening hours of Metroidvania mechanics. But then, of course, it comes along into the Souls-like territory. You kind of have the 6 stat lines. Again, I went a bit out of the box, spellcaster builders. I think there's like 4 or 5 that you can pick at the starting menu. I'm pretty much just dumping all my points into mind. I got a spell just now that goes along with that and scales with it. And yeah, this cool starting candelabra whip thing, which is a bit wild, but that's part of, what's so great about this package, just the art design, the world building. Even though it's a grim, gloomy, grey looking environment, there's some really cool stuff. I got skill checked fairly hard at the first boss, and I think it's more because I'm playing this, spellcaster build. It's a bit outside of my food group. I probably stomped over it with an axe or whatever it is you start with for melee, but that was pretty fun. And honestly, it was a good skill check boss. I'm not trying to throw shade at, say, Kazan, the first Berserker, which I played recently, but I feel like there were issues with the pacing and the introduction of the first big skill check boss. This happens in the first 15 minutes, right? You get a sort of little tutorial area dungeon that you go through, and then out you go and fight this dude. And, it took me a couple of lives, a couple of deaths against him, but it's good pacing, and it felt like an appropriate skill jump for where it was in the game, and sort of setting the scene, going, hey, look, this isn't going to be easy. We're going to have boss fights. And if memory serves from when I first played it, there's some absolute monster bosses. I vividly remember this one dragon that I fought in it. Oh my god, I'm having PTSD already. Anyway, look, the game is great. There's lots of different build styles. There's, parry dodge systems. I haven't really been parrying actually, but you can mostly dodge. You can slot weapons, pistols, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of diversity. But again, all those games that I mentioned, they all have a bit of the secret sauce that makes this game work so incredibly well. I suppose, and I probably left it a little bit late, Blasphemous is something that this would be compared to. To be honest, maybe this is a good excuse for me to go back and play some more Blasphemous, because just however life worked out, I only played a tiny bit. And I can't really call comparison. I can't remember if Blasphemous is actually even Souls-like. Part of my memory tells me that maybe it's just a strict, more puzzle platformer, metroidvania in the vein of something like Ori, Blasphemous 2 as well. So feel free to weigh in if you're a bit more in that food group, but I think the comparisons are inevitable at the very least, from the side-scrolling Metroidvania, pixel art, stylized, and also the Gothic setting as well. I'm kind of hyping myself up. I'll probably love Blasphemous, but who has enough hours in the day to cover all these games? But look, for my money, for my part, without strictly comparing the two, I really like The Last Faith. I think it's quite wonderful. And yeah, the Resident Evil thing, I know that might seem like a stretch for some, and I'm not even sure if I even made the connection when I first played this back in the day, but just booting it up today, that's just immediately that sort of comfortable feeling. I don't know if that's the best way to describe Resident Evil, but it's my favorite series. It makes me happy. And in many ways, whatever you want to call it, the indescribable aligning of cogs and Swiss cheese holes to make it feel like something, well, it just gives me the same sort of feeling, and that makes me very happy. Kumi Souls Games are the guys that did this under PlayStack. PlayStack's a pretty cool publisher. They do some odd stuff, but I don't know if they've ever done anything else, and I hope this was successful enough to give them enough bankroll to maybe do a sequel or just something else. I'd be really curious to see what this dev does next. Anyway, team, I don't need to waffle. Game's great. It's on sale. I highly recommend it. And if you're standoffish about any of those moving parts that I pointed out, specifically maybe you don't like Souls games, or maybe you're not a big fan of Metroidvanias, it might still be worth checking out because of the 50-50 split, the balancing of the plates, as it were, being better than most. The other genre might be able to get you over perhaps the one that you're not a big fan of. Anyway, team, much is over there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.